prepare for dependent arising, because as we said, cause and effect is, I'm going to discuss this now, how cause and effect is a brilliant, karma is a brilliant example of the first level of cause and effect, of the first level of dependent arising, which is cause and effect. Then when we get to the second scope, here is that kind of, it gets very tasty and very clear here, and I want to talk more about this now. How, when we learn to understand how the mind works. So the main point when we're practicing the Lam Rim in the middle scope, there's not much you don't go into too much technical details about the way the mind works. Mainly, what Atisha and Tsongkhapa want us to do is to get in touch with the suffering of attachment and aversion and the other neuroses, and particularly to see there the suffering, the delusion, the disturbing character of these states of mind. This is where the word affliction comes in. These mental afflictions, these painful states of mind. This is where we really become a Buddhist. And this is where we really become a Buddhist, because we start to use Buddha's model of the mind. So the point here is, when we start to understand the more deep level about the mind, this is where we have to understand how the mind works. And I touched on this briefly yesterday, but I want to say it more today, because the more we understand this point I'm going to discuss, the more we understand how to think about the mind and how to think about ignorance and how to understand the way it functions to cause us suffering. Otherwise, it's just a bit mystical to us, So the key thing to understand about the mind, Buddha's view of the mind, which is so utterly specific to the Buddha, is quite unique. You've got to understand this. I mean, we say words like attachment, anger, jealousy, pride, love, compassion, and they are universal. There is no doubt. But it's Buddha's view of the mind, his observation of how the mind works. And indeed, this comes from the Hindus before him, who created this brilliant technique called single-pointed concentration that allows us to go to the depths, the subtle depths of our own actual cognitive, subjective process itself, to learn to become super intimately familiar with the actual workings of our own mind at a subtle level. And this approach is absolutely unique to the Buddha. There is no equivalent, even remote equivalent, in modern psychology or neuroscience. And that's not being arrogant, that's a fact. It's a fact. When we understand that the Buddha asserts, which comes from the Hindus, these subtler levels of mind, we do not posit them in the modern world. It's very clear. So the key thing to understand, and I touched on it briefly yesterday, but let's go into it more now, is there's two different ways of looking at the mind. There's the psychological model, which is the contents, and we're looking at that: attachment, anger, the neuroses, the virtues, the goodness, the blah blah blah. We'll go into more detail. But the other one is the epistemological model of the mind, which is the way the mind functions. So this is really sophisticated and fascinating stuff, I tell you. But the key point here I want to get to, and this is not difficult intellectually, but it's surprising to us, this particular way of showing how the mind works. We have sensory consciousness, which we know, but we don't sort of think about it in the same way as Buddha. And then we have mental consciousness. And these are both mind by definition being not physical, but they're very different functions. We experience them all together as one big lump of me. We don't even do a separate analysis, in our experiences, but it's totally necessary to do so. So the sensory consciousness is actually really gross level. It's in fact, you take the Vajrayana model, you've got gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, and very subtle consciousness. This is specific to the Vajrayana, to Tantra. So gross, by definition, is sensory. The part of our mind that functions through the five senses: the ear, the nose, the tongue, etc., etc. And that level of mind, we give it, as Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss. But it's totally inappropriate. Not being fundamentalist, it's just inappropriate because it's not the boss. But we think it is, because we define ourselves in terms of our body. And honestly, as far as our modern world is concerned, we are only the body. They don't posit such a thing as non-physical consciousness, not to mention subtler levels. No way, we are only the body, So we think we are the body. We know we have feelings, but we think it's all the brain. So we've got sensory consciousness, and the thing is, it's really important here to remember, this helps us understand how it's utterly different from mental consciousness, okay? So we have sensory and mental. So I always use the same example, and it's a really good one to show the difference in the way they function. I always use the same example. So I'll point to my thermos, which I chose because I like the look of it. I like the design, the shape and the design, okay? And so so naturally, if I say to you, this is a nicely designed thermos, or it's a really nicely designed thermos, and I'm looking at it with my eyes, you assume, we all naturally assume my eyes are actually cognizing or seeing a very nicely designed thermos. But technically that's not possible, because this is the point about the senses. This is the whole point. And it should be a revelation for us. The sensory consciousnesses are actually profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. The mind, by the way, is that the definition of a mind is that which cognizes, that which is clear, which means not physical, and that which cognizes, or that which knows, or that which is aware. These are bare bones verbs. There's no flavor to that. That's simply the job of your mind, to cognize. So clearly we ask what? Cognize what, Buddha? He says, guess what, honey? Cognize that which exists, which is the point of all his entire path, to get in touch with reality. So that's the job of the mind. So we've got to understand the parts of our mind. This is what being a Buddhist means, to such an intimate level. So the senses are the grossest one. So eye consciousness, spelling it out, that means the part of your mind, which is not physical, that functions through the medium of the eyeball and all the bits and pieces, has a cognition, cognizes something, and it can only cognize two things: shape and color. That's its only capability, shape and color. Consciousness can only cognize sound. Tongue can only not the tongue physically, but the consciousness, the part of your mind that functions through the medium of the tongue and the nerves all working together. This is the crucial point. Your eyeball does not see things. Your eyeball is physical. And this is the difference with Buddhism. They assert this subtle level of consciousness, the subtle level of it, which is called consciousness, which is necessary for the eyeball to function. But we only posit the eyeball, But no, the mind is mind, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, tongue consciousness. So the senses are profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. And this should be, honestly, a revelation about how we live our lives, and really points to Buddha's point about how we're living in La La Land. So, okay, so if my eye consciousness isn't capable of cognizing a well-designed thermos, it can only cognize shape and color, you've got to ask the question, well, which part of my mind is doing the cognizing of a nicely designed thermos? And that's obvious. That's your mental consciousness. That's where the workshop is, as Lama Tsongkhapa says. That's where all the thousands of thoughts and feelings and emotions and unconscious and much subtler levels of consciousness that, again, like I say, we don't even posit as existing in modern psychology and modern neuroscience. So this is the key point I'm getting to now, finally, to get to really understand the delusions, to understand the virtues, to understand eventually ignorance in order to realize emptiness. We've got two levels at which mental consciousness functions: sensory conceptual consciousness, and then there's what they call perception. Now, it's a regular word, okay, in English, but it's got a very specific meaning in Buddhist psychology when it comes to the mental consciousness. Conceptuality is the grossest level, and we only live at the conceptual level. And so then we've got perception, which you can only access at a subtler level. You can only have perceptual consciousness, if you like, a cognition called perception, or they call it direct perception, non-conceptual direct perception. We're only capable of that at a subtler level once we've got single point of concentration. And that's eventually where we have to go in order to have direct insight into emptiness, impermanence, and everything else. That's why you cannot get realizations at the grosser level. Even though you can have the most brilliant conceptual mind, know every word about Dharma, memorize the entirety of the Buddha's path, but until you've got single point of concentration and have completely subdued your conceptuality and your sensory, which is what happens in this technique these Indians invented called the single-pointed concentration, where you access this subtler level of your mind, where eventually you can have what they call direct perception. So that's a mystery to us because we don't posit such a thing in psychology, you know. But this is a vital thing to understand. So, okay, it's now then, if we live at the level of conceptuality, that's very surprising to us. We go, well, what about feelings? Because we go concepts up here, and then we go feelings here. And for as well as we are concerned in our modern world and how we feel, they're totally different areas, but they're all conceptuality. They are all conceptuality. This is utterly necessary to understand. We're going to go into more. But before I finish, if the sensory consciousness, your eye consciousness, cannot cognize a well-designed thermos, your eye consciousness cognizes shape and color. It doesn't recognize black. It doesn't recognize round, mere bare bone shape and color. And then what happens is this, and this is really, I mean, this is a really good analogy. The millisecond my eyes go to that and shape and color is cognized, the next billionth of a second, and I really mean it, quicker than Google, my mental consciousness is accessed. That's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. And that's all our thought, as I said, thoughts, all conceptuality, up as we point up here, you know, thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, to the subtlest level of our mental consciousness. So we have conceptuality, and then we have non-conceptual at a subtler level that we never touch, never get anywhere near until we've got single point of concentration and have become great meditators. Because it's at that level we have to have these non-conceptual direct insights into impermanence, karma, bodhicitta, emptiness, and all the rest, you know. So it's a level of mind that we do not even know, and we don't touch it, and we don't even posit it as existing in our modern psychological models. So the key point I'm getting to now is we live at the level of conceptuality. So that means, so then what we're saying is, okay, so what we think is conceptuality means, you know, all the mathematical concepts, all musical theory, all the complicated conceptual thoughts, intellectual ideas, philosophical ideas, we call that conceptual. But no, not that's one level. But this is where the afflictions come in, the emotional afflictions. So when we say feelings, we mean those afflictions, you know, or love or compassion, where you feel emotional. We call it emotions. I don't know if there's an equivalent word in Buddhist psychology. When we say emotional, that's what we mean is when, and you think about this, your mind is emotional, but mainly you say you're emotional, and you can see a person being emotional because their body is expressing it. Now, the point is the body does not have, the body, okay, the body doesn't have is not the mind, but it's inextricably linked to the mind. This is why the Vajrayana model is extremely helpful to understand. So according to the Vajrayana model, like I said, we've got gross consciousness, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, which are inextricably linked to our physical body. You've got to have an eyeball plus the eye consciousness to have a cognition. You've got to have a proper working ear with the drum and all the nerves working plus the ear consciousness. Then you'll have a cognition through that medium. So that's the grossest level of our being, the sensory. And that during the death process, when we start going through the death process, the first 4 stages are the cessation of the 5 senses. 5? Yeah, 5. Isn't it? So by the time you stop breathing, the first 4 stages, you're looking like you're dead because your sensory consciousness has ceased, right? And that's why we think we're dead, but we're not dead yet. Because why? Because now your mental consciousness is still there. So the equivalent experience is when you go to sleep. It's the same process as the death process, except obviously not as radical. The senses cease and you go to sleep. So you can touch a person on their arm while they're fast asleep. We know they won't feel it. You open their eyelid, their eyes, because the senses the senses have ceased functioning. And so what's still existing, though, and we know that when we go to sleep, we now have dreams. That's your mental consciousness. But so is love and compassion and anger and jealousy that we experience at the ordinary day-to-day level. They are our mental states that we experience through the body. I mean, through our physical life, through our life, we experience those emotions. But we know that the dreams are kind of weird and wacky, aren't they? But they're the mental consciousness. But what I'm getting at here is this level of mental consciousness, all the emotions, all the feelings, You know, all those things we call feelings and emotions, they are all rooted in conceptual thoughts. That's the thing. That's the point. And you could argue why we only experience them emotionally. I mean, when you see a person shouting and yelling with anger, you know, first it looks like anger is physical. No, it's because of the intimate relationship between the physical and the mental, and the Vajrayana model talks about we've got this subtle level of physical body inextricably linked to our subtle mental states, the mental states, that they've got these 72,000 subtle channels, and coursing through those channels is all this subtle wind energy, and connected to all those wind energies throughout all our entire body are the different states of mind, you know? So because of this intimate relationship between the mental states, love, compassion, anger, jealousy, and all the rest, and they're all connected to their own level of wind energy. So when the physical, the subtle, and it's subtle, but it's linked to this gross body. So when the anger is very strong, meaning because you've practiced the conceptual thought called anger, and you define anger as a conceptual thought that exaggerates the ugliness of the object. That's technically bare bones what anger is. Attachment is a conceptual thought that exaggerates the deliciousness of the object. Pride is a conceptual thought that exaggerates your important qualities, and all these things. You can define them very basic, so that at their very bones they are conceptual thoughts. But why there's all this emotion involved in the mind and in the body is because of the intimate relationship, first of all, between the body and the mind. But why the emotion's there in the first place is because we've practiced those sorts, Buddha says, for life after life after life after life. We've practiced them to perfection. So my mother did not have to teach me how to be angry. I'd perfected anger. I had anger in my mind from the time I was born. I brought it with me from a past life. And the millisecond my attachment didn't get what it wanted, I would explode, you know? I mean, join the universe. Look at us. So, it's still rooted in being a conceptual thought, but what the level we experience at is the physical and the emotional, only because we've practiced it. Only because we practiced it. That's why it's so natural, so-called natural. That's why we call it instinctive, you know. So we've practiced ignorance that clings to an eye, attachment to get what that eye wants, anger when it doesn't get what it wants, it has a panic attack, and all the other dramas. We've practiced these for life after life after life after life after life. Like we said yesterday, who was it? Stephanie or Christine or somebody asked and said, oh, shocking to think of past lives. That's why they're so strong. They are completely spontaneous, completely automatic. What we mean by instinct is the fact that we've done these and thought these things so often they are literally second nature. That's why we experience them as emotional. You know, because we're so habituated. So in other words, you can also see another person who might have angry thoughts, but their anger is not so violent. Their anger is not so intense. They can recognize their thoughts getting irritated and upset, but they don't have much anger, so it never gets to the gross physical level. I'm not talking about people who suppress. That's different. But some people just don't have much anger. So that's why they can change their thoughts quite easily and argue with themselves and say, shut up, Robina, and give up anger. Many people who said to me, well, I decided one day I would never be angry again. I'm amazed by those people. That means their anger wasn't that strong. That means it was at the level of the mind, but because the habit wasn't strong, they didn't feel it physically, you know? So this is why these afflictions, that's why they're called afflictions, because the Buddha's trying to point out to us that just simply at the level of anger, attachment, and the rest being afflictions, being mental afflictions, being painful, because we can see, not physically, I mean, we feel like they're physical, but their mental pain is unbearable. That's what we have to learn to understand in the middle scope. But the key thing to understand is those mental afflictions are conceptual thoughts, and they are delusional conceptual thoughts. That's why this word delusion is a brilliant word. They are conceptual thoughts that are not accurate. They are not accurate. They're not accurate thoughts. And that literally means, you know, like I said, anger is a conceptual thought that when your anger is arising in relation to that person who's saying those mean words to you, you know, we know that anger in the mind is painful, but what it causes is that person all you're seeing is their ugly qualities. All you're seeing, as we say, you're painting the whole of that person with that one brush of anger. So when and if you never let go of that anger, you think of that person and you hate them and you never forgive them and you never see a single good quality. We know this. This is how anger literally is inaccurate. It's exaggerating their badness. So we don't think we are exaggerating their badness. But the same with attachment. When you're totally obsessed with the cake and your stomach's empty and all the conditions come together, attachment's going rampant in your mind and all this intense craving to get the cake, we know when you look on that plate, what you're seeing, that bare bone shape and color, that you know is called chocolate cake, but what appears to your mind through the lenses of your attachment is the most divine cake in the universe. We know that. It literally is vibrating deliciousness. And of course, this is the tragedy. This is the thing about first your senses see shape and color, but what appears to you, because attachment is completely dominating, in this case, what appears to is this divine cake. And this is the worst tragedy. It's bad enough, as Lama Zopa says, that attachment causes the cake to appear wrongly meaning more delicious than it really is. You know? It's cause all your happiness. Bad enough, it causes the cake to appear wrongly. But the worst part, and this is the killer about samsara, we believe it's true. We don't even doubt for 1 millionth of a second. Even just a nicely designed thermos. No way in the world, when I look at this thermos, do I, without analyzing it, do I realize that pleasing thermos is not coming from the thermos? How can it? You look at it and you think it's disgusting. That proves emptiness right there. But this is how we live our lives. We are like these lemmings, you know, totally seduced by the outside world. And the source of the suffering is the delusions in the mind. They are literally concepts. We've practiced them to perfection for countless lifetimes, and they cause even the object to not see, to appear that way. That's the killer. That's the killer, you know. So when we look at the world from the time we wake up in the morning till the time we go to sleep, all what appears to us, our shape, our eyes are doing the shape, seeing shape and color, hearing sound. But look at the stories that our mental consciousness paints onto those shapes and color and sounds. And that's the world we live in, made up by our minds, literally made up by our minds, you know. So what we're doing is start at the very beginning. You control your body and speech, at least control the servants of your delusions. Live in vows, be disciplined, and refrain from harming and killing and stealing and lying. Then you get to the next level and you start to give up the painful attachment and anger because they're so painful, the emotional. But then you start to understand these states of mind and you realize how, and this is how Lama Zopa talks all the time, how they're conceptual states that distort the world. As Lama Zopa says, they cause the outside world to appear back to us in a mistaken way. And then we believe whatever we see. We never doubt for 1 second. So it's sort of like, for so long have you believed that a $50 note is a $500 note. For so long have you believed it is 500. You actually see 2 zeros now. That's how heavy duty the delusions are. They're practiced to perfection. So this is the hardest job of being a Buddhist. That's why one of the most profound practices is like putting atomic bombs under delusions. You know, there you are, all excited, anticipating the cake. I mean, I'm attached to my food, right? So, you know, I still do like going out for a meal with people. I'd love to go for a meal, you know, and of course you want to go because if your stomach's empty, you don't want to go with a full stomach because you don't enjoy it. So you make sure your stomach's empty. So tomorrow I'm going out. What's tomorrow? Yes, I'm Saturday still. So tomorrow I'm going out to have lunch with somebody. So I'm automatically thinking, well, I usually eat twice a day. So I'm already thinking, okay, I'll have a very little breakfast so I can be ready to have a nice lunch, you know. You think about food, isn't it? We all think about food. So then the thing is, you know what it's like. You're looking forward to going out, so you're anticipating. That's attachment. So you go, you sit down, you choose the restaurant, you look at the menu, and you see other meals and other plates, and you go, oh, isn't that divine looking? And then you think, oh, I should order that one. You're looking around, you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. So then when your stomach's empty and the food comes all fresh and delicious and beautifully presented by the cook, and you get so excited you can't wait to put it in the mouth, right? You're so excited. Of course, you behave nicely. You don't act like a pig. But they know what happens as you keep eating it, and you're eating it, it's delicious, but attachment's still not happy, so you put more mouthfuls in, and slowly you start to look at that plate, and it looks, by the time you've finished, what's on the plate looks revolting, all this messy, yucky food, and now your stomach's full, and you look over a new person who's just ordered what you just ordered and ate, and it looks so disgusting, because you're full now. So that's how the stupid mind works, and we live like this, and we believe in every picture we see. So when before I was hungry, it looked divine. Now I'm full, it looks disgusting, and we never question. So this is why one of the most powerful practices, Rinpoche says, is to stop believing in our karmic appearances. So we say karma because you've practiced to perfection, brought these habits with us. Stop believing in your karmic appearances. This is one of the most powerful practices. You know, before you shove the food in the mouth, you're excited, and it touches your body. Your body's excited too because your sensory consciousness is very dominated by the attachment. And then you arc yourself. That's why it's so powerful to offer the food first. First, see it as empty, dissolve it into empty space. It does not exist from its own side. Then you imagine as nectar. Then you imagine offering it to all the beings of the universe. This is the most sublime way to eat your food and to help you realize emptiness, you know. All these techniques that Rinpoche gives us. So powerful, so necessary, because I mean just food, you know. But we live from the second we wake up in the morning till the second we go to sleep at night. The senses are our first doorway to the world, and then the billionth of a second after it, you then interpret. Basically, you know, that that shape and color appears. I access my mental consciousness in the middle of the second, and up come these opinions. Oh, what a well-designed cup. Oh, what a lovely tree. Oh, what a disgusting person. And it's all conceptual stories, and including the virtues. They're also conceptual stories, but they at least have some validity to them. They're not total fantasies. They are valid concepts. Virtuous states of mind are also conceptual, but they can be emotional too. We know that. If you've got a lot of love and affection, your body feels it because your body and your mind are connected. Your body isn't angry. Your body isn't affectionate. That's your sensory consciousness. But your mental consciousness informs you of all the stories, you know. So we've got to understand the difference, just to even see the distinction between, first theoretically, between the sensory consciousnesses and the mental is absolutely vital if you want to be a Buddhist, you know. Are we communicating? Good. Okay. So we looked at in the middle scope attachment and aversion, especially attachment, which is huge. I mean, Lama Yeshe says, and it's really true, I could tell you about attachment for one whole year, and you never begin, you know, to really understand it until you start going deep inside and identifying it at ever subtler levels. So attachment, as I said, is the main voice of the root delusion, ma-rigpa, ignorance, unawareness. So now let's get to this one in the great scope. So we do the first scope, the second scope, and then we get to the third scope. We get to the compassion wing, and we don't touch emptiness yet. We now get bodhicitta first. You know, we now blow our mind, transform our mind completely from self-cherishing to cherishing others. We get bodhicitta. Now we enter, as a bodhisattva, we now enter into the 6 perfections of the bodhisattva. The first 4 perfections, you know, are generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance. And they're what you practice. These are the bodhisattvas, actual ones, who bop along from life after life after life, perfecting these 4 in relation to sentient beings. But then on their meditation cushion, they're perfecting the last 2, concentration calm abiding and vipassana. Shamatha and vipassana. Shine and hlaktong in Tibetan, or calm abiding and special insight in Tibetan. Okay, so we have a lot of fantasies about these words. We get very confused, you know. So, yeah, let's just talk briefly about that. There are 2 modes of meditation. First of all, before I go further, I said this yesterday, we've got to remember that concentration meditation, shamatha, is not a Mahayana teaching. Tsongkhapa puts it in the Mahayana component of the path, you know, but it's not a Mahayana teaching. It's a Hinayana teaching. You have to have that to realize, to get your own patimoksha, to get your own individual liberation. So by definition, it is necessary. It's not a Mahayana teaching in its character. There are understandings of it according to the Mahayana, for sure that. But there's the other one is, so the second one is, in fact, it's a Hindu teaching. The Hindus discovered this brilliant technique. They're the ones who created that technique. So then the second type of meditation is called insight, is called special insight, vipassana. So again, too, this is not a Mahayana teaching. By definition, how can it be? Because a Hinayana Arhat has to have it. So how can it be Mahayana in its character? But it's taught in the framework of the Bodhisattva path, the perfection of wisdom. So, of course, there are different levels of understanding emptiness. We'll discuss emptiness in a minute. We're getting there. But these two modes of meditation are taught in this framework as the fifth and the sixth of the perfections for the Bodhisattva, combined with the first four perfections. So the insight one, vipassana, Lord Buddha taught many insight meditations. And as we know in the world, there's a type that people almost think is like it's a little group itself called vipassana meditation. But there's many types of meditations, many types of insights. Insight is a great word in English. I think in some other languages they don't have such a good word. But we know insight's a very special word. You're thinking about a problem, and then you go, and I got a bit of insight into my problem today. It's in ordinary daily life. It's a really good word. So don't mystify it, It means inner seeing. It's very simple. It's very clear. By working things out in your mind, something clicks. You get the meaning, It's very practical. It's very necessary. Don't fantasize it. So the Vipassana, I think the world knows, and I've never done it, but it's one of Lord Buddha's practices, one of his first ones. You got your two modes of meditation, okay? So in terms of that particular one about the insight, the popular one I've heard, I think I'm right. And if I'm wrong, someone better tell me. Maybe Nim can point me out. Comes from that tradition. This insight, apparently you get your concentration first, and then you check, you pay attention to the sensations in the body. Now the thing is, what Lord Buddha wants us to get insight into is not the body, believe me. He's getting us to get insight into impermanence. And it's a brilliant method for how to do that. As I said, I have never done it, so I might be wrong about it. But there's many of these techniques that Lord Buddha has taught us. So obviously, if you're looking at the Lam Rim, all the points of Lord Buddha's teachings, whether you're on the Hinayana path, Mahayana, or anything else, of course you've got to get insight into every one of them. You've got to first hear it theoretically, and then you get your concentration on your cushion. Then you go from your concentration and you take your teachings on impermanence, and then you try to get insight into it. That's using the two modes of meditation to get in a subtle level by using your mental consciousness to get insight into impermanence, not the physical one. Then you do insight into karma, insight into all of the teachings. Of course, you must meditate on all of them. And so the first level of meditation is conceptual. You use intellectual. This is what we talk about in the Tibetan tradition, which is just Buddha's teachings. First, you sit down on your cushion, okay, and you get some concentration. Use your breath, whatever you like, to get your mind focused. And why do you want to get your mind focused? Because you want to get some insight into something, and your mind's got to be stable. If your mind's all over the place, you can't get insight into anything. So you sit down on your cushion, you get some concentration to the degree that you've accomplished single-pointedness, which for most of us mightn't even be at the first of the 9 stages. Never mind, you do your best. Then you get your focus. You stop that mode of meditation. You stop the focusing. You go to the second mode. And in this tradition, and in this style that we're discussing here, the method of getting insight, you're using conceptuality to think something through. That's why the term in Tibetan Buddhism, which throws a lot of people, is called analytical meditation. So here, because I think in our culture we're so addicted to thinking that meditation means concentration. No, it's the first mode. And in fact, it's not even technically, like I said, it's not even technically a Buddhist teaching. Nothing wrong with it. These Hindus invented it. But it's a brilliant technique, and you need it. In order to realize everything, you need to get insight into anything, you need it. So the first one is concentration. Then you go to the second mode, and this tradition, whether it's karma, impermanence, bodhicitta, you utilize this model, this method. You get your concentration, you stop the concentrating, and let's say you've just been to your class and you've heard about karma, and you've written all your notes down because you haven't got good memory, So what you're going to do in this little meditation session, using these two modes of meditation, you do your concentration first, and you get steady. Then you stop the concentrating. You now get your now, maybe you have your notes, maybe you remembered it, or you might read your notes, and then you'll think it through, and then you'll do some analysis. The word meditation in Tibetan, right? This is a real important point. The word meditation, the verb to meditate in Tibetan is the word gom, and it's the verb to become familiar with, to familiarize your mind with. To familiarize your mind. It's not what we think, meaning concentration, not at all. So this analytical approach, analytical meditation, well, analytical is a fancy word that means to think about it, but intelligently. Like you just come home from school, your teacher told you 1 + 1 is 2. You've never heard this before. Wow, mummy, I just heard that 1 + 1 is 2. Wow, so difficult. And your teacher says, go home and do some concentration meditation first, Robina, then go to the second mode of meditation and do some analysis, please, so you'll get an insight into it. That's what she's telling you if she's a Buddhist. And that's completely common sense. If you can't sit down and have a bit of focus, you'll never understand that 1 + 1 is 2. So what do? You have to have the information correct first. You've written your notes down. You get some focus. You close your door. You tell your sisters and brothers to go away. You're 5 years old. You close your door, you sit at your desk, you get yourself focused, then you take your schoolwork from school today, and it says 1 + 1 is 2. Now you might use your blocks, you might use writing, but you've got to think it through, right? It's logical. That's the first level of our mind, intellectual. So you think it through intellectually. That's called analytical meditation. So you think it through, and because you're focused, it will start to go in. And you have to know the meaning of 1, the meaning of plus, the meaning of equal, and then the meaning of 2. And at some point you go, oh, mummy, I got it. That's an insight, is it not? Well, that's what you've got to have for karma, impermanence, bodhicitta, and emptiness, finally. It's not fantasy. It's not mystical, I promise. It's a practical methodology. And it's utilizing conceptuality as in this particular approach. Now, if you do the one of the body and the insight and the sensations, that's different. If you do Mahamudra, that's different. Dzogchen, that's different. All different. Visualization, that's different. But this is the classical method. You study the teachings, and we are brilliant at this in our culture. We are intellectual geniuses when it comes to learning music and math and carpentry, and this is the method that we all use to understand it and to get insight and to pass our exams. It's called intellectual. But thinking about it often enough, it becomes experiential. We know this. So conceptuality is a stepping stone to direct experience. I don't want to, it's all just intellectual for me. I want to have an experience. Well, you can't have an experience of Bach's music until you've squeezed your brain with all the thoughts, have you? It's really logical, So you have insight meditation based upon good concentration meditation. So now that's the end of that one. Now let's look at what you now have to get insight into in terms of emptiness. Everything in the entire path is leading us to this one. This is the subtlest insight we need to get, the most difficult, the most sophisticated, the most primordial, because it's the subtlest mistake. Ignorance is the subtlest mistake. It's the root affliction, the root delusion. So let's look at this ignorance. What is it, okay? Because in one broad sense, attachment is ignorance, anger is ignorance, jealousy is ignorance. They're all mistaken concepts. They're all mistaken viewpoints. But this particular marigpa, this particular ignorance, and this is the way about all the ignorance in Buddha's view, it's a very specific type of ignorance. First of all, as His Holiness says, it's not just not knowing. Ignorance will be just not knowing something. But this is not like that. This is why it's so difficult. So if I'm just ignorant, if you say to me, what's 1 + 1, and I don't know, I'll just say, I don't know. That's simple ignorance to fix. You could just tell me the answer, and because I have no alternative view in my head, I'm not clinging to any other view, I will learn it very quickly. And if that was the ignorance we all had, we'd all be enlightened in a couple of years, I think. Please hear this point. So the ignorance we've got, which is the problem, is not only do we not know, even just the cake and the angry person, not only do we not know, but we're talking the root ignorance here, not only do we not know how the I exists, not only do we merely not know how the I exists, start again. Ignorance, what is it? Attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of a cake. Anger exaggerates the ugliness of the boyfriend. Well, what does ignorance exaggerate? This is the point. What does it exaggerate? It's exaggerating too. It's the root exaggerator, the root decorator. As Lama Zopa says, all the delusions decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that just aren't there. So ignorance in relation to anything, but let's say in relation to the I, we'll talk about this thing called I. The ignorance not only doesn't know that the I is empty of existing from its own side, not only does ignorance not know that the I has no inherent existence, not only does ignorance not know that I has no inherent existence, ignorance thinks it does. That's the problem. So in other words, if you say what's 1 + 1, I'll say 3. If I believe, not only do I not know that the answer is 2, but I believe a lie. So not only do we not know the truth that the I has no inherent nature, we believe it does. In other words, the ignorance is a direct opposite of the reality. It's not merely not knowing. Merely not knowing is easy to fix. So this cup of not knowing is believing, not only not knowing the truth, but believing a lie. And the lie is an exact opposite of the truth. And we have clung to this lie, Buddha says, as long as time exists. This is the root lie since beginningless time. And all the other lies, all the other afflictions, all the other misconceptions, all the realms of existence, the hell realms, the God realms, the human realms, the animal realms, the formless of the formless realms, all are created by sentient beings who believe in this lie. It's the root of all suffering. So it's quite hard to see. Quite hard to see. But it's possible. Buddha's shown us how, okay? So this ignorance is massive. And it's and all these, even just, forget ignorance. Attachment and aversion are bad enough. They're all at the level of assumption. Because as I said, we've been practicing believing these lies for so long, So we should be a bit patient with ourselves for this reason, So, okay, so this is why we need to learn the teachings, learn the words, learn the concepts. Of course, there are meditations that are non-conceptual. Mahamudra, as Lama Yeshe says in his book on Mahamudra, there's no concept, there's no dogma, there's no this, there's no that. You just go straight to meditation. That sounds delicious to us. But let me tell you, for example, Lama says, in Mahamudra, Lama gives commentary on Panchen Lama's text. And Panchen Lama mentions there are 2 main methods for realizing emptiness. And the first one, as Lama says, is what he did in the monasteries, which is the method we're discussing here. You learn the concepts first. You learn 1 + 1 is 2. You squeeze your brain. You learn the concept. You write it down. You go home, and then you get insight into it through meditation. We know that. You learn cooking that way. You learn theories that way. We are brilliant at this in our culture. We have very, very sophisticated conceptual minds in the West. We've got great education systems, and we're all intelligent. We learn the theory first. We go home. We internalize it. We either keep cooking and cooking until it becomes natural, or we think and think about the math until we know it, or we play and play the challenge, or we become experiential. That's our methodology. Nothing surprising. And that's the methodology, as Lama says, he learned in the monasteries. That's the method I've used in my life. Learning the theories, you learn the concept, and us here too. You learn the theories, and then through concept, you think about it, you listen first, you contemplate the meaning, and then you get insight through your meditation. And then the penny drops. That's the process. Very logical process. So Mahamudra, that's the one method, as Panchen Lama says. You get the knowledge first, then you get the insight through meditation. Now, the other method is the opposite. You go straight to meditation, and then as a result of that, you can then understand emptiness, and then you're able to articulate it, something like that. Now, that sounds delicious to us. Oh, I don't have to do any theory. Oh, I don't have to do anything. Oh, wonderful. But this is how it is. You listen to this. You listen to this. Using music as an example, The classical method, if you want to play Bach, the classical method is listen to the squeeze your brain and all the complicated theories and practice and practice and practice and practice until eventually you've perfected it. We know that method. Now the other method, no theory, you go straight to the piano and you try to intuit Bach. Now look how difficult that would be. I'm sorry. Even just to make a cake, you'd make a complete disaster. You never heard of theory. No one's ever told you a word about theory. And you take this, someone says, gives you flour and eggs, and you have to nut out how to make a cake experientially. What a joke. You'd be there for 47 years, you know. So actually, Mahamudra is far more difficult. And the irony is, for Dzogchen or Mahamudra, you could say the person who can get some experience from those meditations is the one who's done the intellectual work first, even probably in a past life. No doubt about it. And we need both anyway, you know. So here we're doing the intellectual approach, okay? The theories first. So, okay. Because ignorance is a super subtle misconception, literally a misconception that causes all things out there to appear to us as having an inherent nature. So those words are completely mystical. What the hell do you mean inherent nature? That it causes things to appear to us as existing out there from their own side, having zero to do with any causes or conditions. In particular, and finally, having nothing to do with my mind labeling it. That's the subtlest. So this is where this dependent arising business comes in, you know. So the two truths, things, there are many logical arguments we need to use to unpack and unravel and deconstruct and annihilate the lie of ignorance, okay, the root of ignorance. But this is the king logic. The best, most powerful one. Tsongkhapa waxes lyrical about it. It's one of his texts, is praising Buddha for his teachings on dependent arising. This blissful text that Tsongkhapa wrote, you know. So it's all dependent arising. We can see this is the most stable way to understand emptiness. We're seeing the ultimate reality, which emptiness is the shorthand for ultimate truth, ultimate reality, and it's seen in the framework of conventional truth, the two truths. Things have a conventional characteristic and they have this ultimate or final characteristic. So seeing everything in terms of the two truths, using dependent arising as the logic, is the most delicious way, because dependent arising is the shorthand for conventional and emptiness is the shorthand for ultimate. Okay, so let's look at that finally. And so the Buddha is saying everything that exists, all phenomena. There's many terms when you study one of the first texts you study, the one I first studied, called Dura, Collected Topics. You learn all the nuts and bolts of the Buddhist worldview, you know. First of all, you've got the term called existent or phenomenon. There's about 5 synonyms for that which exists. Everything in the universe that does exist is called an existent, a phenomenon, an object of knowledge, or an established base. These 5 synonyms. That's the term that covers everything. Well, practically. Yes, everything. Then within that, you've got impermanent things. Then within this, you've got a series of this, and it all breaks down, you know. So the crucial point about this terminology, existent or phenomenon or object of knowledge, it's really important to understand these words, because the Buddha says whatever exists, the definition of an existent, each has got a slightly different definition. The definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind. Now that in the world is demented. We think the mind is nothing in comparison with hard things like hard sciences, you know, but the Buddha is the opposite. If the mind can cognize, a valid cognition, can't be a made up one. So what defines something as existing is that it can be cognized by your mind. That is what, so in other words, it's axiomatic that which can be cognized by the mind is that which exists. That's pretty intense. So the Buddha is saying right now why he wants us to even understand the concept of an existent, an object of knowledge or of knowing, is that right now we're living in la la land. We are cognizing things that don't exist. Attachment cognizes a divine chocolate cake that'll make me happy. That cake does not exist on that plate. Anger believes the ugly boyfriend that's the cause of all my suffering. That is not the boyfriend that exists. And the ignorance believes in the inherent me that does not exist. So we've got to learn to know what the hell exists and what doesn't. That's the job of being a Buddhist. Okay, so now ignorance, dependent arising, and emptiness. So let's use the particular phenomenon that we're especially attached to, and that's called I. Okay, so there are many words that can be used to refer to I, me, person, self. They're all synonymous. We are one of those. We are a person. We are an I. We are a me. We are a self. Those words are synonymous. Okay, in this framework, right into a person. The word used is a bit different in other ways, but never mind, generally speaking. So, a dog is one of those. A hell being is a person. A Buddha is a person. They're terms used to refer not always to all sentient beings. For some reason, a Buddha is not a sentient being. Everybody else is a sentient being. It always confuses me, that one. I don't know why, but never mind. But never mind, person it refers to anybody who's got a mind, who exists, you know? That's a person. That's an I. That's a self. That's a me. So this is the one, of course, we're most attached to, isn't it? That's what they say. We'll have a look at it. So what this ignorance causes us to believe totally. Ignorance causes us to believe totally in an inherent I, an independent I, an intrinsic I, an I that exists from its own side, an I that is established from its own side. All these synonyms are all referring to what ignorance sees, what ignorance believes exists, which is exactly what does not exist. Now, there's 3 levels of dependent arising that Lord Buddha points out, and each of them actually is an argument with the prevailing views before. So this is why we talked about karma. It's a brilliant example of the first kind of dependent arising, which is cause and effect. That everything, all the impermanent phenomena of the universe come into existence independent upon causes. So we know that if you're a materialist, you believe that the mother causes you, father causes you. If you're a Christian, God causes you. You know, we think all those things, right? We believe that we know that we are a part of we're the result of causes, but we don't think that our mind plays any role at all. That's why karma is so powerful, because it puts us right in the center of responsibility. That my past actions are the cause of who I am. And that's why I said even thinking about karma can be a profound shift in your mind to help you start taking responsibility and therefore loosen the grip of ego, you know? So cause and effect is the first of the 3 levels of dependent arising. So the second level, I want to discuss that one. The second level, more subtle, and again another argument, it's with a particular view that says there is an I, there is a self that is partless, that is kind of inherent, permanent, unchanging, uncaused, and has no parts somehow, you know, and Buddha argues in depth with that one. So this argument here is a key one. If you read the Lamrim, you're going to look at this, you're going to see this one. The key argument here is that Buddha's saying this ignorance, this marigpa, causes us to totally believe that in here somewhere, is a very particular part, a very particular piece of us, along with all the hundreds of thousands of other pieces, nose, ear, eye, eyelashes, bones, tendons, anger, love, jealousy. If you named all the thousands of parts that make up an eye, you'd have lists of thousands, wouldn't you? All the thousands of parts of your mind and all the thousands of parts of your body. So we know that's true. The I is made up of parts. That's fact. But the Buddha says this ignorance makes us believe that there is a very special part in there, walking, like my friend Pende says, walking hand in hand with all the other parts, called I. And this is a gross mistake. This is a gross mistake, but still pretty subtle to get. But these are the stages. This is a gross mistake. It's not the subtlest yet, but it's really good to understand it. So we believe, and we know we believe there's an I in here. We say the words I, the owner. It's like the owner, you know, the boss, the owner, like the landlord. That's how we feel about this I. There's an I. We never know. We never ask where it is. We never analyze where it is. We never search for it. We just assume it's there because the mistake is so utter. So we assume our language says, I have a nose. I am angry. You know, we talk this way, and we know the word I is the central player in our head, and it's like the boss. We talk about it in this dualistic way of being the possessor. My I possesses a nose, my I has this, my I has anger, I am this, I am that. We think that's how we talk all the time. That's how we talk all the time, isn't it? So Buddha says, it's a complete misconception. There can't be, he's telling us, he tells in advance, there can't be a separate, independent little piece called an I as an owner. And we have to use lots of logical arguments to prove how that's true, you know, which sounds so absurd to us, you know, it just sounds so ridiculous. So there's so many arguments they use. And so one, you know, as you know, in the Lam Rim, there's this 4-point analysis they talk about. The very first thing you have to do establish is the very first thing to establish. You have to, and this is the most difficult, actually. It's the most hard. Because Buddha's telling us in advance, you won't find an independent, separate I, Robina. You won't find one. And he says, incidentally, you don't even need one, by the way. But we all believe it. We all believe it's the boss that runs the show. Of course we do. Which is the same philosophical view as a creator. We all believe that we have to have the world is so amazing it needs a creator who runs the show. That dualistic view Buddha completely does not have, you know. So he's telling us in advance that he has found there is no independent I. By the way, he's not saying there's no I, so don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, although we do all the time. We'll go into this. He says there's no independent I. There's no I separate from the other parts. He's saying that. But he says you've got to prove it for yourself. So you've got to search for it, which sounds beyond hilarious. To search for your I sounds just like a joke for us. But this is one of the meditations we learn in the Lam Rim, you know. So the first thing is, if you're going to search for something, it's very obvious. If you're convinced there is something somewhere, if you are convinced, let's say if I'm convinced that my iPad is in the dining room, I left it there, like there's a table full of devices, let's say, you know, people have to leave their iPads on the table. And I say to you, please go and search for my iPad. Please go and get my iPad. I left it on the table. Now, first, if you don't even know what an iPad is, which is the best example, if you don't know so forget you don't even know what an iPad is. You could walk into the dining room and you could look for 1,000 years. And you would never know with certainty, would you? Because you might not know the name of many other things. Maybe you can deduce the things you don't know. But if you don't, or let's say there's 47 iPads on, it's a better example. If you know what an iPad is, but you don't know what my iPad looks like, and there's like 47 iPads on the table, you can look for 100 years of those 47 iPads, but you would never have certainty, would you, of whether one or other is mine. In other words, you have to know what you're searching for. It seems so obvious. Here, of course, it sounds weird because you're just saying, well, Buddha says there isn't an I, so what do you mean you have to know what you're searching for? But that's what he's saying, because we've been clinging to this independent I for countless eons. We have to, through meditation, again and again, we have to learn to be super clear about how that I appears to us. This is the most difficult point, you know, and that's why you have to study. He says it's got to appear as if it's separate from, independent of the other parts, and it's quite subtle. So that's the first point. You've got to first establish what you think this object to be negated feels like. Second, once you've established what you think the I is, you now have to search for it. But you've got to first establish the parameters of your search. And there's only two options. There is either an I that is separate from all the other parts, because the parameters of the search are this person, not in the chair next to me or the table. The parameters of the search for the iPad are in the dining room, okay? Not over down the road, next block. The parameters of the search are here, the aggregates, the parts, you see. So it's either going to be an I that's separate from the other parts, which is one of the first things we feel, the owner, or there's got to be an I that's oneness with all the parts. And this is the analysis we have to do. So they say once you've done this analysis at the subtlest level of your meditation, you will finally realize that there isn't an I that's separate from, and then you'll realize there's no I that's oneness with, because that's more subtle. And then you realize emptiness, basically. That's how they talk. That's how they talk. And then what that leads you to is finally the conclusion, just naturally, that I is merely labeled. That's the subtlest one, that I is merely labeled. That comes naturally from that analysis. So the first level of dependent arising is cause and effect. That's already a necessary example, already necessary meditation. You've got to realize there is no I separate among all those causes, and there's no I separate from those causes. The second one, this one, the parts one, which we'll go into more, this is the one we have to use as the basis of our analysis, and then that leads us to the conclusion there is not an I that's separate from, and then we conclude there is not an I that's oneness with, and then that leads us to the third one, the subtlest one, that I is merely labeled, that there's no I separate from the mind that imputes it. This is the three levels of dependent arising: causes, parts, and mind labeling, So these are the theories. So what are some of the logical arguments then that we have to utilize to prove the first one, even, that there can't be an I that's separate from? So as Lama Tsongkhapa says, one example, very simple. We say, I have a nose, don't we? So now look at this carefully. We should do an analysis. How many nouns is that? Well, there's two nouns, aren't there? Nose is a noun, and I, okay, that's a pronoun, never mind. But there's two phenomena we just mentioned. We said the word I, that's one phenomenon, and we said the word nose, that's two phenomena. You agree with that? So if I say to you, I have a thermos and a phone. Now, how many phenomena did I mention? I mentioned three, right? This is logical, ordinary, simple, logical communication. If I say to you, I have a phone and an iPad, then you know when you look over where the noise is coming from, you have to identify three separate, independent phenomena. And independent here has a very specific meaning. It means independent of each other insofar as the way they function. So you'd have to point out three things. If I say to you, I have a phone and an iPad, you'll say you can see I'm lying. There's only two things. There's I, one thing, and there's phone, and there's iPad. There's what do you call thermos. So that's logical. If I say I have a thermos and a phone, you have to point out three phenomena, each of which is not the other, and each of which doesn't depend upon the other for its function. It's really important. We'll get to the next point and you'll see. That's pretty clear. Now, I will do another statement, and it's a pretty similar statement. I will now tell you I have a nose and an ear. Now, without analysis, and this is the point, without analysis, I am speaking the truth. Look, nose, ear. Very simple, not a problem. But this is the problem. We don't analyze it. Now, again, I said three things, right? I, nose, ear. Well, let's prove it's true. So there's the ear. And we know the ear is not the nose. And the ear doesn't even depend upon the nose for its existence. Not possible. I can hold my nose and my ear's fine. My ear can be deaf and my nose still breathes. We know that in a simple sense. But what about the third phenomenon? Because we believe There is a third phenomenon, distinct, precise, and clear, that in fact is the owner of everything, including the nose and the ear. So we have to, so where is that I? Where is it? That's what we have to search for. Where is that piece that isn't the nose, that isn't the ear, that isn't the mouth, that isn't the teeth, that isn't the anger, that isn't the love, that isn't all the other bits? That's the analysis we have to do, quite literally. But we believe there is, of course we do. We believe there totally is, of course we do. Never doubt it for 1 second, you know. So as Lama Zopa says, it's so clear, if there were a separate piece called an I, a special little piece, somewhere between the breasts, usually we think it is, isn't it? If there is a special piece called an I, then when, you know, when say Lisa says, oh, Robina, I think your nose is so ugly, you know, if she say that to me, then I will say naturally, how dare you insult me, Lisa? I'll be so upset. And then she would say accurately, no, Robina, I didn't insult your eye, I insulted your nose. So if there were an eye in there, your little, as Lama Zopa says, your little eye will be going, oh, phew, I'm so glad Lisa didn't insult me. Poor nose must be feeling very upset. That's how it ought to be. But we are, so this, in this view, then this is also pointing out, not only do we think I'm the owner of the nose, but when I say, how dare you insult me, because this is the other mistake, more subtle, that I'm assuming the nose is me. We assume that the aggregates are the I. This is the deepest mistake. The aggregates can't be the I. The nose can't be the I. Because if nose and I are the same, meaning synonymous, why the hell would you say, I have a nose? It's like saying, I have an eye. How silly. And if eye is the same as nose, well, where does your ear fit? Well, my ear's eye as well. Oh, I see. So you've got two eyes, have you? How interesting. I mean, this don't seem very convincing to us. But we've got to really argue. This is the whole point that's so surprising to us. Because these delusions are so rampant, so primordial, so utter in their grip on us, we have to argue with them. And that's where you have to understand that they're conceptual thoughts, you know. That's why I like to use the example of IKEA. I think it's a great one. One of the meditations they say we need to do is you literally deconstruct all the components of your eye. You meditate and you pull out each of the pieces and you put them in front of you. There's all the physical bits, all the mental bits, and you literally are pulling apart the components of the eye in search for the piece called I. And the logic being, if you keep pulling all the parts away, if there is an I that's separate, you have to find it. Well, IKEA is the opposite. I love IKEA. Buddha would have liked it as well. You see on the computer, there's a nice, you know, there's nice, there's nice, say, Lisa, you know. You look on the computer, there's a nice Lisa, and you think, oh, I'm going to buy a Lisa. So you know you get very disappointed. You go to the shop and they give you a bloody box with all the millions of parts. You've got to make your own Lisa, you know, but it's a really good analogy here. So what you do is you start building the Lisa. And we know, this is what I said, this is very important as well. It's so powerful, this one. You know, when we know that IKEA, when they send you a table, they've built the table, then they've unbuilt it, and they give you the exact number of pieces, the exact number of screws, the right size, and you know that if you put it together, everything will fit, and each thing has its own function. And this is one of the really good ways to think about what exists and what doesn't. If something exists, it has to have a function. You have to label it, you have to define it, and it has to have a function. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. And that's why we mostly live in la-la land. So I say, Mummy, what's that? Well, it's called a thermos. Well, I'm happy now, Mum, but kindly give me what it is. Give me the definition. Well, a definition has two parts. One tells you its physical characteristic. It's this flat-bottomed metal container, okay? So now that's its first part. I can see that, but what's the crucial part? The second one is the second part, which tells you its job, its function, its its actual, what is it? What is its meaning? But mummy, what is it? It keeps my tea warm. That's the job, the function, the actual meaning of that phenomenon. So that's the crucial piece. So that's the same with the mind. The definition of mind is that which is clear, which is referring to the non-physicality, and then that which cognizes. That's the function of mind. So here, each piece that is part of Robina, each of those things in that box of that table, we know IKEA's worked it out. Everything in that box has a function. You don't get 4.5 legs and seven screws and just have to make it up yourself. That you know exactly. So the same with the person. Every tiny part of Robina must be thousands of parts that make up a person. We know that. Every one of them has to have a function. There wouldn't be extraneous things like you might have 2 hearts, you could have 2 knees, 4 knees, but some people have that. But in general, each part has its job and they all work beautifully together, functioning as a Robina. So that's the real meaning of merely labeled. Finally, they all function as a Robina, but you're not going to find a Robina. So this is the point. You buy the IKEA. Lisa buys the box and she's gradually constructing Lisa. And she's putting on the arms and the heart and the things, and she's getting worried because all the pieces are coming together, but she hasn't found the little eye yet. She's worried there's no eye, and she brings up IKEA and has a panic attack. Where's the eye? You don't need one, Lisa. It's all right. Because you know why, Lisa? Because if you put them all together, all the parts, and this is the point, they function as Lisa. What do you want a separate bloody Lisa for? The parts together function as a table. You will not find a separate piece called table, and you can't say they're all the table. The parts are not the table. Table is the label you impute upon the parts. The parts function as the table. You don't need an extra table-ness. It's an unnecessarily addition. That's what the delusions do. This is why we live in samsara. So there is an I, there is a table, there is a computer, but not independent of the parts and not oneness with the parts. But they function as the computer, they function as an I, they function as a thermos. That's what it means, really. So relax, So they say the yogis in the meditation have realized emptiness. They come out of the meditation and things still appear to them, but they don't believe it. But the cup is still there. They pick up their thermos and it still holds their tea warm. Thank you very much. So in other words, it's not nihilism. It can't be nihilism. When you've got the two truths together, and there's no time to go on about them much, we can go a little bit. Okay, so this is a whole other discussion. We'll go there in a minute. But basically Buddha is saying you don't need, this is a really good way to put it, you don't need a separate I because the parts do fine functioning. The same with your hand. Look at your hand. What's hand, mummy? It's the name we give to the 5 digits, which is joined to your wrist, which is joined to this, right? And what's its job? It holds a thermos. Okay, so you analyze what is the hand. Well, it's got 5 fingers. The thumb does something. The index finger does this. That does that. The pinky does this. They each do their job. They're not, they're not going to argue with each other. The pinky's not going to say, "Oh, go away, ring finger. You're doing my job." They all do their job perfectly if the body's working nicely. And so, where's the piece called hand? There, it's just a name you put on the 5 bits. Come on, much more loosey goosey, That's how the universe exists. So it doesn't mean there's no hand. Of course there's a bloody hand. I'm just proving it to you. Look. Looks like no hand. Looks like no thermos. It's magic. Look, there it is. So these are some of the thoughts we have to have. So this is why the 2 truths are so important. Because when we hear, this is another discussion now, when we hear there is no I from its own side, there's no I there among the parts. And there's no I oneness with the parts. Of course, we can be forgiven for thinking, there's no I, and we fall into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says, No reason to think this. As Lama Zopa says, when you realize that there's not one atom of anything there, that makes it, that is the I. It's as if there's no I, but dependent arising, there is an I. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. So these are the two truths together. And the thing is, as soon as we hear emptiness, we throw the baby out for the bathwater. And as soon as we hear there is something, we go, thank God there's something after all, grasp. So here we over-exaggerate, here we under-exaggerate. We've got to get the two truths together. That's why when the more you think about emptiness, and it leads you to go, ha ha, there is an I that's a dependent arising. And every time you think about dependent arising I, you go, ha ha, that means there is no independent I. So you've got to put the two truths together. Then you are on the right track. Then you cannot fall into the abyss of the great mistake. Then you can be stable, you know. But remember that all of these are concepts. They're all, and just, see, conceptuality for us seems very gross. You know, I have feelings. I'm beyond conceptual. Load of rubbish. Anger and jealousy and depression are the most grotesquely grasping concepts you could ever imagine. So when we realize that these conceptuality goes to much subtler level, far more subtle, far more subtle. Yes, there's a question. Yes, come, ask me a question, sweetheart. Okay. Go, darling.
Yes. So, my question is around, is there a particular definition for the wrong views, or what you just talked about, going into nihilism, that nothing exists at all, or the other extreme, the materialism, as in things exist intrinsically by themselves? Is that what they call the wrong view?
No, there's many. Okay, when you read the words wrong view in the Tibetan literature, you're referring to ignorance very precisely. You're referring to exactly the root delusion, ignorance. They're all, in fact, attachment and anger are all wrong views, but they use that term specifically for believing in an intrinsic something. You know, there are many wrong views. Karma's a wrong view as well, but they're usually meaning the root one. They're referring to the actual maripa, the ignorance that believes that things have an intrinsic nature. That's the wrong view they're talking about. Do you understand? Okay, darling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Someone else. People. Think anybody. Somebody. Questions.
Hi, Robina. Sorry, I can't find my raise hand button.
You're there. I can hear you, darling. Go, Rebecca.
Is there a universe?
You have to give me the definition. What's the universe? How do you call the universe, sweetheart? What does it mean?
I don't know. Okay, is there an atom?
I'm not a scientist, but if they say there is and they've found it and they've established it and defined it and pointed to it, then there must be an atom, yes. Everything that Rebecca exists, your teal-coloured, T-shirt exists, your blonde hair exists, your glasses exist, your nose exists, the pot plants behind you exist, but not in the way we think, Rebecca. That's the point, that we exaggerate the status of it. We give it extra status. We add layers upon layers of things on top of what exists. That's a good way to put it. Attachment even exaggerates the deliciousness of cake. There is a cake there. It's validly a chocolate cake. Everybody can prove it. But your attachment makes it look more divine than it really is. When you understand my point. That's the way to think, that as Lama Zopa says, these delusions, these afflictions decorate on top of what is there, characteristics that aren't there. But the trouble is we don't realize we do it.
It's an incorrect understanding of all of those things, rather than that they don't exist.
Yes, exactly. And this mistake gets to a very subtle level, but that's how they talk. Yeah, exactly.
Because and the mind is not, and the I.
If the mind, okay, good. Let's look at it. Is the mind the I? If the mind is the I, then you're saying that mind and I are the same thing. Is that right? They're the same? That's what you mean by the mind is the I. That must be the same thing. Yeah? Would you agree? That's what you're saying?
Yeah. I think
if it's the same thing. Okay, well, where does your body fit? What's your body then? What's the body?
The body is the collective which acts out the mind. It's a receptacle. It's a container
of the I.
The body is a gathering of atoms in the continuum of all existence. It's a collection. It's a as a planet is within space. Yeah. a planet in space is a kind of density of matter.
I'm just discussing the I, not the planet. So you're suggesting that your I is the mind. So then why would you say I have a mind? You probably do say that, don't you? Why would you say that? If the I is the mind, why would you say I have a mind? That implies two things. Why would you say that? That was silly. And the mind is not one unified thing. You've got anger, that's in your mind. You've got love, that's in your mind. You've got kindness, that's in your mind. So there must be three I's there. So you've got to think this type of way. It seems rather silly to us.
Things can have different faces and different. You have a hand, you have a finger. You have a finger, you have a hand, you have an arm. They are all different gatherings.
Rebecca, what are you trying to prove here? What's the question? Keep on track, would you?
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
I don't know. I guess I'm just quite confused. I'm trying to understand more.
Well, then...
I have thoughts that are independent to your thoughts. I have experiences that are different to your experiences.
So what's that proving? What's the point here?
Is that not indicative of an I?
I didn't say there's no I.
A very subtle I.
No, there is an I, there is a shirt, there is a Rebecca, there is a nose, there are glasses, but then...
The mind, our thoughts, our behaviours don't constitute an I.
No, they do constitute an I. They are, in fact, the parts of an I, but they're not the same as the I. These are the words, darling. Rebecca, these are the words, sweetheart, so there's plenty of... I mean, just keep listening to the teachings. Keep listening one step at a time. Okay. That's I would suggest. And you can prove Buddha wrong if you like. It's perfectly fine. He'd be very happy with that.
I'm sure he's far more right than I am.
Good, okay. So anyone else got questions before we finish? Anything to think about, talk about more? Lisa, any questions, darling?
Actually, I just did have one particular question. You were talking about. So you mentioned the about bringing the two truths together.
Yeah, that's right.
And I wondered what language you use to define when you bring the truths together.
What do you mean by language, darling? Sorry,
so you're talking about.
Okay.
So you mentioned about bringing the two truths.
Oh, okay, darling. What that simply means is when we think emptiness and then we think dependent arising, we see them as opposite. We see them as opposite because we think dependent arising. Without analysis, we think it means something does exist. And then we hear emptiness and we think that means something doesn't exist. So we hear them as completely kind of crashing into each other. When we understand these, even intellectually, then whenever we think emptiness, it will remind us, it means that things are dependent arising. And when we think dependent arising, it reminds us that things are empty. So we need to practice thinking this way. So instead of the two truths pulling apart, we bring them together finally in the middle way. And the final middle way is when you've achieved Buddhahood and dependent arising and emptiness will appear simultaneously to your mind. They're effectively like the two sides of the same coin, something like that, you know.
Beautiful.
Good. All right, darling. What else, people? Something else? It's enough. We've filled up our time, I think. So lots of food for thought. I mean, there's so many wonderful books out there to help us with these teachings. And this is really Lama Zopa goes on, talks marvelously about dependent arising and emptiness. So I really encourage you to study his teachings, but to study all the teachings, to study all the texts so we can go one step at a time, you know, and learn all this stuff. Hello, Adele. You got a question, darling?
Yeah, yes, I do.
Good.
Lovely to see you, Robina.
Yes.
So could I think that this continuum of mental thought or concentration or whatever I do, the mind,
Yeah, right,
is a random stream of consciousness? It is not controlled by an I, except it is controlled by the ignorance of my conditioning and my characterizing things from that conditioning.
So I wondered why it sounded good until you said the word random. That threw me a bit.
Well, it seems to me
fine what you just said, but why the word
random is, well, it seems to me that wherever I go, there is some reason why I'm there. Whoever I meet, there is some reasoning why I bumped into them. But at the same time, it seems quite random if there is no owner.
Okay, so this is, and I hear your point now. Okay, now I hear your point. I hear your point. So that's the view, that's very much the view, that is the view that the Buddha would say is the dualistic view that does imply, that does say there is a creator. For example, the world, you know, the world needs the world and everything else is created by this permanent uncaused energy that is existing that then runs everything. And that's the same philosophical view the Buddha argues with, because he says, no, karma runs everything. The law of karma, every thought in your mind, every thought in Nicole's mind, every thought in Rebecca's mind runs everybody in the universe, every sentient being runs that person's mind. That, you know, every thought that goes on, your virtues and your non-virtues are programming that continuity of mental moments, and the putting into the mind of seeds of those virtue and non-virtue produce the future person, and even produce the future result of an environment, of a universe. Everything is created by the minds individually and collectively. So minds are running themselves. We don't need an external boss, the dualistic view of punishment and reward. Equally, internally, we don't need a little I that we think of as the boss that runs the mind. No, the mind runs the mind, but the mind's got millions of parts, Adele. One of the key parts of the mind is intention, not motivation. It's bare bones, I will. That's the real meaning of karma. The real starting point of anything that ever happens is I will. And that's the thought of volition. Then there follows attention, then intention, and then love. Then they all lead from there. So the mind, if you want to have a boss, the mind is more boss than the body, definitely. You know, so the mind runs, but the parts of the mind all have their job, and they run the person. That's absolutely true.
So the dependent arising, the relative or conventional I, is training my intention.
No, you don't need, no, your intention doesn't need training. There's no I that does any training. That's the whole point. The I is a name you give to the combination of your body and your mind. Mind is also a word you give to the combination of the parts of the mind. And anger is the word you give to the combination of the bits and pieces of anger. Everything exists like that. You don't need a separate piece that runs anything. They all work together. The pieces of the hand all work together to function as a hand. All the people of the universe work, not together, unfortunately, work to function as a universe. Everything does its job. There's no need for an extra boss on top.
So when I manage...
Yeah, go on.
When I manage to merge the absolute with the relative...
Yeah, then you're on the case, baby.
And I'm free from having to think I have an I, because everything is functioning just fine.
Everything is, and you realize there's no intrinsic eye, intrinsic nose, intrinsic ear, intrinsic hair, intrinsic Adele, or anything else. Yes, when you realize that, then you're in touch with dependent arising. You're in touch with karma. You're in touch with impermanence. You're in touch with virtue, and you're blissful as a bonus, and you're compassionate. Everything will work perfectly. All right. We can look forward to it, can't we? Okay, people. Time to go, Lisa. What do you think?
Yes, great. Shall I dedicate?
Yeah, you say the prayers for us. Let's just hear the dedication prayers. You read them out, sweetheart.
But firstly, just to thank you, Venerable Robina, for your clarity and wisdom.
Good job.
And may the precious view of emptiness that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. May the merits of these virtuous teachings be the cause of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And may all Rinpoche's Dharma wishes be fulfilled.
Good, sweetheart. And may we get to see his nice little Nepalese boy's face very soon.
Yes, absolutely.
That's right. Thank you, darling people. So happy to see you all. Somewhere next time, who knows? I'll be near you in November. Didn't plan to go to New Zealand, but never mind. Maybe we'll see you somewhere. But I'll be back. I'll be in Australia for a little bit. I'll be in Bali, actually, at some point in October, I think. That's going to be coming soon, I think. Anyway, whatever.
I'll come to New Zealand.
We'll see how we go. We'll see how we go. Maybe a quick trip. Who knows? Okay.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Bye, sweetheart.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.